Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Real Food Campaign in conversation with Emma from Pesticide Action Network UK. I'm really excited to speak with Emma today, as I'm sure a lot of you are aware that PANUK are the only charity focused solely on tackling the problems caused by pesticides, and they promote safe and sustainable alternatives in agriculture, urban areas, homes, and gardens. Now, this is something that we don't hear a lot about. We kind of know a little bit that pesticides aren't great, but actually, where are they? How are we exposed to them? So Emma's going to go through some of the work that PAN UK do, and also the campaign Pesticide Free Towns that look to reduce pesticides in the supermarket supply chains, and also aim to end the use of pesticides in urban spaces. They have some great resources, one of which is the UK Clean 15 and Dirty Dozen, which, if you aren't aware of it and you're using the Environmental Working Group and you're based in the UK, you need to get the PAN UK one. They've also published research into the pesticide use in supermarkets, which is fascinating. And I know Emma's going to talk to us about that. But also recently, I think it was earlier this year, Emma, you released some information or a report all about pesticide use in councils in London and how much people are using and what they're using. Yes, I know that our audience are very keen to learn a little bit more about what you found out. So without me going on anymore, I'm going to hand it over to you, Emma. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Yeah, great. I'm really happy to be here, and hopefully don't overwhelm you with things. I've sort of broken it down into sections, and yeah, do ask questions as you go. Oh, I need to be able to share my screen, because this will be much easier with a presentation to follow. But yeah, all those points that you pointed out is exactly what I'll be talking about in that order, I believe. So that's quite nice.
Oh, bear with me as I do the share screen. Can you do that now?
Yes, I can. And now can I pull up the right window? Yes, here we go. Hello. Better at this. Cool. So hi, everyone. I think we already got quite a nice little intro in terms of what PAN do. So we call it PAN. But yeah, so we're the only charity that aims to reduce and end pesticide use in supply chains in the UK. So there's lots of different places we operate. I'm in the UK team. But today we're kind of looking at urban residents and where you're exposed to pesticides, but also how actually tackling pesticides as an urban resident can really empower you. So I think in the blurb, and really an issue that I think is really strong is, what can you do to tackle biodiversity decline, tackle all these different climate crisis issues, and how that intersects with what you can do as an individual to eat cleaner and protect yourself from unnecessary exposure to chemicals. So yeah, I personally work on the supermarket projects that we do, and also on Pesticide Free Towns campaign. But yeah, so it's all about pesticides. So yeah, the main thing to really think about is, as urban residents in particular, we encounter pesticides through the food we eat, so through residues. So that's pesticides that are left over on either in the food or on the outside of the food. And so that's the major one. And then in outdoor spaces, so literally leaving your house and being outside can potentially expose you to pesticides. And so just a little bit of an understanding of what pesticides actually are, especially in terms of regulation, if that's something you're interested in. They are that's what we call them, plant protection chemicals. So it's all in the idea of killing off pests that will be around plants. So there's also chemicals that are biocides, which will be to target insects and things like that. Get rid of insects. So that'll be a slightly different thing. So this is really around plants. So any weeds, any things like that. So that will include insecticides, so insects that will attack plants. But yeah, so as written, there's herbicides, mossicides that kill off mosses, fungicides, insecticides, and a few others like rodenticides. So anything that's going to attack a possible crop, a plant, that's what pesticides are designed for. And so, they're killing agents. They're very much poison. So that's a little bit of background. What they do in terms of their impact, so what they do is kill off different pests, but what does that actually mean and what does that actually impact? We see biodiversity decline in a massive way because of these pesticides. So decline of farmland species, of bird species, decline of insects. That's a really major one recently that I think everyone's very aware of. Huge impacts on bees, not just honeybees, but wild bees as well, on hogs. Anything that basically relies on meadows, on wild plants. And then, bats, toads, frogs, voles. So lots of small mammals, and then anything in that food chain that's going to build up from it, basically. So it's really thinking holistically. It's not just getting rid of a plant or getting rid of a small insect. It's very much what feeds on that insect, what might accidentally inject that chemical, so it's thinking food chain wise. And then in terms of human health impacts, that's also a factor. So I think a lot of you will kind of be aware of these things already. But different chemicals will have been linked to really serious conditions. So non-Hodgkin's lymphoma is a really classic one. Parkinson's disease, breast cancer, those are sort of the more extreme ends of exposure to chemicals, to pesticides. And then there's sort of the chronic exposure, which is linked to endocrine disruption. So the endocrine system, I feel like a lot of you all know better than me. But and as well, more chronic conditions, which are lesser but very much not, like asthma, so worsening that. And so that's sort of everyday people. That it doesn't have to just be, that can be farmers, that can be that chronic exposure, but then there's also acute poisoning. So literally from that ranges from death to cancer. From less in the UK, more in countries that in the supply chains that will be dealing with the most harmful chemicals. But sorry, to give you some context, there was also some workers, just ground workers, that are using considered lesser toxic chemicals that developed horrible cancers. So it's just as it's not necessarily just field workers. And then finally, the sort of tragic end to this is that children are much more susceptible to this, to the effects of this exposure, because obviously they're smaller. So even if it's a smaller amount of exposure, children will obviously have higher amounts accumulate in their bodies. So developmental issues are associated to it. Again, endocrine system disruption and various other conditions such as that. So that's sort of the backdrop and why we care and why we're doing what we're doing. And the idea of sort of precaution. So whilst all of these are possible impacts, and you're not going to see this every day, it's very much slow and hard to point to. It's very much why have these possible impacts on biodiversity and on people when you could not. So the first major route is pesticide residues on food. Something to say sort of, and I'll repeat it throughout, is that residues, I think it's really interesting to look at how this impacts human health in terms of your immediate, like buying stuff in the supermarket and ingesting it. But I think it's really important to always also remember that if there's residues on produce and you're concerned for your health, then think of all the other people involved who've had to work with those chemicals to get that product to you. So I think that's something that we really emphasize. It's, the effects in terms of residues are really hard to point to, and it's more around you're being exposed to these chemicals and why when you don't have to. But I think the more, and I'll come back to it, but the most important factor is really to think, if you're being exposed to these tiny amounts, whoever's growing that food is exposed to tremendous amounts, and whatever biodiversity is where that food is being grown is obliterated. So that's something to sort of come back to. But so residues in food. The major ones that have been pointed out, and this is the Dirty Dozen work that we do. So this is following PRIF reports, which I kicked myself to try and remember what that stands for, but it's basically UK testing on residues. So UK produce that comes from abroad and from the UK that will be tested before it comes into supermarkets to make sure that it doesn't have too many X or Y residues. Whether that's enforced or not is a different question, but so we have the data on what the government finds. And so the major ones, and to give you an idea of the effects as well, are neonicotinoids. So I think most people have heard of those now, neonics colloquially. We all kind of know now those are really toxic to bees. They're meant to be banned in the EU and the UK, but there's always emergency derogations, ways to get around it. And more importantly, they're still used across the world. And most of our food in the UK, by the way, doesn't come from the UK. I feel like everyone here knows that. So again, that's a major one that's found as a residue is neonics, which are super toxic to bees and have some of them are also thiacloprid is associated to cancer as well. Yeah, I can run through them. Maybe we can get to that after if you guys are curious, but there's 4 different ones. And yeah, those are often found. Then a really major one as well is imazalil. So that's a post-harvest fungicide. So that's sort of a fungicide. So to get rid of basically anything that's going to start breaking down your produce between it being grown and it being in your supermarket shelf. So that's something I didn't even know existed. So before I started this job is, it's not about growing your food. It's about maintaining your food to look good when it's flown across the world. So post-harvest fungicides, and this one in particular is associated to cancer and reproductive developmental issues. And then 2,4-D, quite a famous one, really toxic. It's a herbicide that gets rid of plants like weeds. And that's an endocrine disruptor. Glyphosate, the most commonly used herbicide across the world. Very legal in the UK, even though it's a probable carcinogen, according to the WHO. And then the last one, which I pulled out, was clopyrifos. So that's an insecticide. Kills off different insects that might attack a plant, and that's associated to children's developmental issues. So all these things have been found on UK produce, and not only have they been found as a single thing on one produce, but you can see from the pair there, multiples of these will have been found at the same time on a single item. So it's all these different chemicals at the same time that might have interactions between each other. So it's not just, on its own, these are the effects that they each have, but then we don't really know. There's no scientific exploration to look at what these cocktails do to our bodies either. So you have to bear in mind those sort of cross-acting possible effects. Okay, apologies. I thought that would delete that thing. I will just do this so that you can actually see. There we go. So these are the worst. So this is the dirty dozen list. These are the worst residues that we find. So 99% of residues on grapefruit, 96 on citrus, strawberries. So these are all non-organic vegetables and herbs and whatnot and produce that the government tested, and this is how much residue they found on them. So not a great list. I mean, that can be found on our great list, but not a great thing to see, and that can be found on our website. So I won't go too much into it, but it really shows, what we're actually dealing with when we buy vegetables in supermarkets, or wherever, if they're not labeled organic. So what can you do for this section, for the food section? So as an individual, very much in terms of protecting yourself from the everyday, from possible effects and not wanting to have all this unknown that you're exposed to, you can wash your vegetables. That does help to a certain extent, especially with citrus and things where it's like a hard shell. But a lot of these produces will have been grown with the pesticide, so it will be in it. It will have, it will infiltrate. You can buy organic if possible, though I know that's, completely unattainable for a lot of people and expensive. That's not always the solution. You can shop consciously. So we created the supermarket ranking, and that we have scorecards that shows you which supermarkets are doing better or worse, not just in terms of organic, but some of them will have better, some of them will have better restrictions than the government do in terms of residues. So that's something we're really pushing for, so that some of them, if the residues is above even half of what the government says is okay, then the supermarket sends it back and has an action plan in place. So that's something that we have in place. And depending on where they sit, you can see what's sort of safer or not. And you can sort of cross-reference that with costs, because that's not a factor that we took into account. So that's sort of what you can do as an individual. But most importantly, and what I come back to, is that you want to get your supermarkets to do more, to push more, so that they're using regenerative farming methods, so they're pushing for less pesticides or no pesticides, that they're innovating. A lot of this, supermarkets have incredible supply chains across the country, across the world, and the capacity to actually change things, the capacity to ask from their growers and their suppliers that they do better. So we work with supermarkets, top 10 supermarkets, to make them, help them really figure out different ways of doing things. So we work with them on the integrated pest management. So it's thinking differently, basically. So this is a picture on the left of a tomato food spray trial that we've been doing in Ethiopia. And then we work a lot in Nicaragua on different types of growing, companion planting, things like this. And so we have an action on our website where you literally just send an email, and it really does put pressure. We've been doing this ranking for quite a few years now, and we've been seeing year on year the change. You can see the change on our website of that these supermarkets are doing to improve the quality of their food and the quality of life, and on the ground across the world as well. So that's something really important. And that's just an email. So I'll put it afterwards, or we can link to it. But it's just an email, and it really does make a difference to show that people care. Okay, second part of this is the outdoors. So literally leaving your house. What does that mean? So pesticides in cities are used. Oh, am I hearing someone? No, it's just someone unmuted. Are used by councils, are used by different land managers. So maybe a housing estate, maybe a golf course, maybe a school, depending on where you live. And then of course it's used by residents. Hopefully not, but often. And so what that looks like is, it's used on pavements, in tree pits, and parks, along hard edges in parks, in gardens, private gardens, on playgrounds, sports pitches, churchyards, and any other green space you can think of, basically. And so the picture on the right is a worker spraying between pavements. But this is an example of a worker spraying in a playground under hedges. Your guess is as good as mine of why that's useful. This is an example of we call it furniture. So like road signs, gates, stuff like that. That's called urban furniture. Starting to know the lingo. And, that burnt sort of yellow grass is how you recognize it. And this is a tree pit that's been charred by 99% likely glyphosate. So when you leave your house, you might often see it, or you might see the effects of it. So this yellowing grass along hard edges, or it's often like a strange straight line. It's quite distinct. And so what you can do, I sort of get it out of the way in terms of private gardens. Obviously, don't use pesticides if you're at home. We have a really great guide of gardening without pesticides that you can turn to. And there's amazing groups across the UK and in London that really have a lot of advice, more than us, in terms of wild gardening. But then you can also put pressure on supermarkets, again, not to sell pesticide products. So we have a really great campaign. Again, it's just an email that thousands of people take, and thousands of people write to their supermarkets asking them not to sell pesticide products. And just not having the choice actually makes a big difference. And it's been really quite successful. Both Co-op and Waitrose, following 2 years of doing this now, have stopped selling pesticide products. So they might still sell products that are plant protection, but they're all chemical free. So they're all alternatives. So I've had someone write to me with a picture, and I actually zoomed in, and none of them had any chemicals in them. So that's a pro. And if no one can get their hands on these chemicals, then people are going to start turning to better tactics. But most importantly, and that's my sort of baby, is the Pesticide Free Towns campaign. So that's a really rich network. I don't know. Yeah, I guess you can't see. I'll go here. That's better. It's a really vibrant network of campaigners across the UK and councillors that are basically talking to their councillors, talking to their local authorities to get them to stop using pesticides in their local environment. So all the orange dots are places that have campaigns. All the green dots are places that have gone pesticide free, and pink is places that are sort of on their way. They have measures in place. And that's a sort of distinctive logo, pesticide free. And it's specifically on urban pesticides. Move that along. And so the whole point is to create greener cities. So there's lots of chemical-free alternatives. If you do, and it's often the case that there are spaces that you need to keep keep weed-free. So if it's a busy highway, or literally like by a hospital, places where you need easy for wheelchair access or things like that, there's loads of ways that you can still weed effectively without using pesticides. But we're also very much pushing for councils and the public to accept more weeds, to accept more plants and to stop calling them weeds, because of how beneficial they are for insects and because of how lovely they are for people. And sort of the last step in that is really helping and encouraging people to celebrate their local biodiversity. So we can go more into sort of the alternatives that there are, but yeah, we have amazing sort of resources towards that, but just in terms of timing. The key messages that come out of that campaign are that, councils are undermining their efforts. So a lot of them say, we want to do things for bees. We have wildflower meadows. A lot of them are participating in No Mow May, which is really wonderful. But then on the other side, they're still spraying, and there'll be an area that's like wildflowers, and 2 meters down the road, spraying everything. So it's a little bit of a counterintuitive move, and we're trying to really connect things along in councils so that they do things for biodiversity, which includes not using pesticides. The other thing to know is that, it's not a like-for-like replacement. So there's not going to be, pesticides, it's a very easy thing. You just spray it, kill everything. You don't really have to think. If once you do change to a chemical-free alternative, it is a little bit more technical. There is more strategy to it, but hopefully the council's up for it, and usually they are. And then another key thing is to get the public on board. So that's where people like you potentially wanting to, get involved in a campaign or sharing things on social media, just changing mentalities a little bit is really important, because some places the council will make the decision, but then residents, will see things going a bit more wild and will freak out because it's not as tidy as it used to be. And, we really need mentalities changing as well. But something to remember is change is possible. Over 40 councils across the UK have done it already. France as a country has done it. Paris is pesticide free, which I think is quite telling because it's a very aesthetically minded city. Florence has just gone pesticide free. So there's loads of places that have done it, and the UK is kind of lagging behind. And briefly to finish, there is a pesticide free London. So I think a lot of you are based in London. We've just launched, and this is usually the rest of the campaigns, other campaigners sort of do the legwork, look into what's going on the ground, how much pesticides their local council is using. For London, we've carried out 32 freedom of information requests and compiled an incredible amount of information with some volunteers, so that you actually know what your borough is using, what measures they have in place, if they have any biodiversity measures. So all that is on a map where you can just click on your borough and it pulls out all the information, and you can sort of just at least know what you're dealing with. So for example, Hammersmith and Fulham and Lambeth have actually gone pesticide free, but then places like Hillingdon or Barnet or Havering are terrible. Like they've done nothing and seem to have no intention to do anything for now. So there's, there's the extremes, and then there's people in the middle, councils in the middle that are doing things and making it happen a little bit and could really do with a push. So that's London. Ooh, they have our signage. And that's, again, something that you can join. So yeah, lots of opportunities, lots of, for the supermarket stuff, it's literally just an email. And because it's such a business and it's so corporate, it very much does have pressure to represent what people want. And, if thousands, which they do, if thousands of people email them and put that pressure on, then supermarkets feel the need to actually reflect that and take that into account and put that into action, especially with removing pesticides from shelves. In terms of campaigning locally, it's incredible. It's really helpful for us and for your local environment. And it can look like whatever you want it to look. So, if it's just a few emails to your council, or if you want to set up a petition, it can look diverse. But the key thing to think about is that, you're making a change locally. potentially in your own household, but you're also impacting things much further afield. You're positively impacting the environment across the world, positively impacting farmers' lives by helping, get funding for better measures. So I think it's sort of an easier route to a lot of change, let's say, to tackle pesticides. So that's me. I don't know how long I've been speaking, but thanks, everyone.
That's great. Thank you, Emma. That's so much to take on board.
Yes.
So does anyone have any questions? No questions. Oh yes, Catherine, do you want to unmute yourself? What I might do is just, I'm gonna